Return by appointment. The HOA letter came on a Wednesday, slid under the door because the latch swells when the heat puts its shoulder to the house. The envelope had that pale suburban blue like jeans washed too much. I knew the board head by her loops. She writes the way people talk at bake sales, with long, friendly tails and a strict backbone. Replace deteriorated fencing by end of month, it said, in a voice that smiled while it measured. I stood in the entry with the letter and the air barely moving, the unit bumping along like an old man stubbornly keeping pace. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen, steady, comforting, a held note you only notice when it drops out. In the living room, a ceiling fan ticked, where the pull chain taps the glass globe every revolution. Outside, a leaf blower 1 block over droned like a small plane, circling a field that wasn't there anymore. I pressed my thumb on the place she'd circled the claws. It left sweat on the paper. I thought of the path behind my yard, where the hedge thins and flats of grass grayed into a drainage swale with cattails browning at their tips, summer holding on too long and too tight. The fence along that line leaned. Last winter, a storm took one post out, and the panel hinged like a loose tooth. I'd wired it to its neighbor with twine and told myself I'd deal with it when the weather picked a team. The letter was 1 page, but it carried other pages behind it, old warnings and notes about potted plants, not in neutral colors. A photo of a car that someone said had been parked in a visitor spot overnight. I set the envelope on the counter beside the bowl I kept my keys in. Carmen had bought the bowl when we moved here, bright Spanish blue with a crackle glaze like ice under paint. She took half of her things 2 summers ago and left the bowl. She said I forgot things if there wasn't a place to set them. She wasn't wrong. I rented the auger that afternoon from the place behind the feed store. The feed store is a feed store by sign, but sells mostly dog treats shaped like bones with human names for flavors. Maple bacon, campfire turkey. The man at the rental counter wore a cap with his name stitched on, Travis, and a shirt so washed the fabric went skin soft. He set the auger on the dolly like it was heavy, but not an enemy. "You'll want new posts," he said, the same way people say you'll want rain in July. "Treated. 12 on center, you're doing the prefab panels, or you going with just board and batten?" "Panels," I said. "I want it done by Saturday. They're fining people now." He nodded like he'd heard of fines, taxes, the way a body breaks down. "Check before you dig," he said, and slid me a pamphlet with cartoon lines underground colored like candy. Gas yellow, water blue, electric red, cable orange. He tapped the corner with a nail-bitten square. "They're slow right now," he said, "but if you're going shallow and it's interior to your lot, you'll probably be fine." Probably is a lot of weight on not much wood. I put the auger in the bed of my truck and ratchet strapped it down. The sky had the white of an old sheet, clouds worn thin in the middle from use. Heat came at you sideways off the asphalt, dry, then wet, then dry again, so your neck stuck to your shirt and let go, stuck and let go. A cicada clung to the fence by the shop and screamed its whole small life into the afternoon. Back home, I chalked a line from the corner of the lot, where the hedge tucks in at a neat right angle, down to the back gate, where the latch started to rust in a way that made an angry flower. I shook the line and let it snap, a white bite in tan grass. The lawn had gone to straw early this year. We were on an every other day watering schedule you weren't supposed to break, and even when you kept it, the water had a tired taste, mineral and faintly warm like the hose had a fever. I started the auger and it coughed, then gunned up into a good steady throat. It drives itself when you let it, if you lean right, the bit digging a circle like it remembers where things go. Dirt came up in ropes, clay and root and stones, shining like wet teeth, until the sun dried everything back to matte. The smell rose around me. Earth that had been quiet for a while, stirred up and told to speak. 2 holes went down clean. The third had a little stubborn to it, a pale band of sand where the lot used to be something else, maybe fill from when they did the street. Then back to clay. I set the auger to lift on the fourth, and the bit thunked. Not stone. You know stone. This was hollow, a note from a bottle, plastic under tension. I killed the engine and let the quiet spool in. The air had a pressure to it like a barometer line that didn't want to move. I knelt and dug with my hand, expecting some scrap, cup, toy, those green turtle sandboxes with the domed lids people had before people feared the sun. My fingers met a slick that gave, and a sandwich bag came up like a fish you don't mean to catch. Inside, a blue inhaler with a dinosaur sticker peeling at the corners, the tail bit half off like a younger me with nothing to do at church. The plastic fogged my palm. You tell yourself that cease just sweat in a bag with air that can to go anywhere. But the canister was cold, not cool, winter. My name rode a piece of white tape like a little raft, letters crowded to fit, J-A-C-K, my mother's hand in her all caps that made everything equal, even bad news. I shook it, and the little ball clacked. Bodies remember sounds they don't practice. Something in me stood up inside my chest and watched. I pressed a hair because you press a hair when something says, remember. The plume kissed my hand and then the hole, a white, soft question that smelled like peppermint rubbed on aluminum. It lay on the clay and then folded into it like dew that didn't care what the day had decided. Across the hedge, a bicycle bell rang once. Not a trill, a single punctuation. That bell didn't belong. Nobody on our street rides except a boy 3 houses down who has a helmet shaped like a dinosaur head and no patience for bells. But this ring had a weight. The crisp steel ping of older bells that don't pretend they're polite. The sound placed itself in my ear exactly where it had lived the night my father carried me inside and said, easy, easy, breathe, while my mother shook the inhaler like she was waking it. I told myself what you tell yourself. Some kid lost it, same brand, same everything, and my mother, well, she had a roll of tape like every mother, and she labeled things like everything else she did. Careful, practical. But the dinosaur sticker had the same bite at the tail, where a scab of white showed through blue. And on the ridge by the mouthpiece, there was a shallow crescent from where I picked at it during commercials, because the show paused different in summer. Wind moved like someone big walking down the next block. I stood there by the hole with the bag in my hand and the auger still in its squat and felt a breath on the other side of the hedge catch, then clear, a small kind of sound that lived in our house before my voice changed and never came back. There's a place in a day where you can turn the wheel one way or the other, and months later you can tell the exact point by the feel in your hands. I set the inhaler on the turf between holes, like an offering to whoever had placed it, or whoever I used to be. Then I stepped back, because stepping back is old muscle memory from tool safety, and from giving things that aren't at yours a little room to breathe. I resumed the auger. The rhythm came back, holes numbered along a line, the way time sometimes lets you count it. The next dredged up a marble green cat's eye that caught sunlight in the wrong way for afternoon. A plastic whistle followed after, orange squashed to salmon by dirt, the kind you get with a second-place ribbon at field day when all they want is to keep kids moving. The ground along the chalk line had decided to have an opinion, and the opinion was return. By evening, the post stood plumb with a string I set from corner to corner, the tops line neat like a haircut. Sweat streaked my arms in tracks dust clung to. I tamped and tamped, the sound hollow then tightening as the earth around wood remembered how to hold. When I policed the yard after, plucked twine bits, leveled ridges with my shoe, the inhaler was gone. On the new corner cap, an oval of dew held cold, a little reservoir the size of a small hand, stubborn in heat, as if whoever had leaned there to watch me finish didn't let go when the weather did. That night the air barely cooled, a heat that had learned to wait out the dark. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water that tasted of hose and metal and read the letter again, Then set it under the key bowl, the way I set the time card slip under my mug at work, because air moves what S light. I checked my phone. There was a text from Carmen about Sunday drop-off. "He has a science thing to finish," she wrote. "Don't let him forget it." I wrote back okay. Normal things steady a person. The fridge kicked off and the house exhaled like I did when I sat down in the truck. I stared at the back door where the window carries a square of yard like a polite painting. The grass in the painting looked gold, not dead, and the new fence line was a ruler someone had set down on a desk and forgotten. Sleep came like a store's closing. Lights not off, just fewer on. Noise not gone, just pushed back. I woke twice to a drip that wasn't the sink and found nothing. The second time I stood at the back door, hand on the cold metal of the lock, and watched darkness hang in the yard, the way wet shirts sag from a line. In the morning, I went to work. I do maintenance for a refrigerated distribution place out past the tracks where the river slows and widens until it can to decide if it's river or a lazy lake. The building has no windows. The loading doors open on slots of sky you can miss if you don't to look when you step out for air. Inside is white and grey and blue in big rectangles and stainless piping that runs overhead like an exposed set of ribs. Compressors tick, pumps click, thermostats cycle. The walk-ins sigh when you go in. There is always a sigh when a door that gets used too much meets something that wants to keep still. You learn the language fast. You know when a coil is laboring by the way the fan argues before it gives in. You know when a relay is near dead because it ruins your morning breaks for a week. The noise of the place is a kind of company. The forklifts beep on corners and the handheld scanners chirp when a pallet label scans right and rasp when someone gets lazy and scans the same code twice. I like the work. It asks for attention and rewards it. A fair trade. My boss is a compact man named Harlan who speaks at the volume of someone who knows most people listen better when you don't push. "You feel that?" he'll say, thumbing a pipe while you get a vibration through your nail beds. He's been doing it 25 years. His nails are neat and blunt and always a little black in the creases. That day, the freezer 2 went high twice and we chased it. The screenshot log printed out on a strip of paper that curled back on itself like a ribbon. On the strip, the timestamps marched regular as soldiers until one broke rank, jumped 30 minutes, then came back like it realized its mistake. "We need to get a new board on that," Harlan said, "before it gets a personality." I stood on the ladder with my head inside a panel that had that warm dust smell when electricity and lint have been on a first-name basis for a while. I tightened a neutral and the monitor chirped at me in its factory cheerful tone. In the chirp I heard a ping, not the beep-beep of a forklift, not the high perky of a scanner, a single bicycle bell, stern and clean. It hung there in the air between the fan clicking down and the fridge hum stepping back up. I held my breath and it didn't come again. I laughed, but not with much joy. People store sounds like canned tomatoes they never plan to open. At lunch, I ate in my truck because the break room smells like fat and onion from whoever microwaves the same burrito at the same time every day. The sky outside had pulled a coverlet of brown haze up to its chin. Heat pushed at the windshield, and the dash gave off that plastic scent that is new car the first year, and then just plastic after. A siren ran somewhere far. The distance ate most of it, but not the way the pitch wavered when it hit the overpass. I texted Carmen a picture of the new posts, and she thumbed back a thumbs up. I decided to take as more than it was. She is not unkind. We are a lot of good tries and one long wrong turn. I scrolled past an ad for home water tests with saturated blue drops and a question. What are you drinking? When you live with one of those asthma stories in your chest, you read about what's in your air and your water like reading can fix it. On the way home, I bought panels from the big store where the garden section smells like damp cardboard and valuables on sale. I strapped them down and chalked the line again because chalk fades when you meet a day with boots. The grass along the line had a depression to it, like a seam had been pressed and then partially filled in, like a folded thing smoothed and then decided against. I told myself that's the auger and the tamping. People like answers with tools in them. I set a panel, and the hedge stayed quiet except once, when something small coughed again in a way that let me tell myself, birds cough if you've never listened hard for birds. By dusk I had a fence that looked like fences do in catalogues, straight and patient. The corner cap held its due spot, like a coin glinting in a pocket you never use. The thermometer outside the kitchen window read 89 at 11, and there is a brand of heat in that number that wants your thoughts to soften. I drank water until my stomach sloshed and sat in the dark on the couch because the light felt like a thing you didn't want to ask the air more work for. The neighbor 2 doors down had their television up too high. The laugh track came across our siding in waves like a lake when no one is watching it. I went to bed and dreamed in the low-grade way where your brain does paperwork. Files slid rooms wrong by inches. My father E.S. back at the top of the stairs while I tried to tell him something about the mower and could not pick the particular word from the box where they kept the others. I woke to a drip. The drip was in the yard. At the door, the square painting of the yard showed a darker square inside. The dew on the corner cap radiant. I thought, it's always cold on metal, that's not remarkable. Then I thought, wood is not metal. Then I am making it into a thing because everything else is a thing when you don't want to look at yourself. Morning had a bruise at the horizon from some fire west, the smoke of somebody else's trouble making our day pretty. My mouth tasted like pennies. I took the hose to the hedge because everything green looked like it gave up. Water laid on the leaves in beads, like the beads on the corner cap, and slid off in places as if the plant had decided to be less vulnerable today. The water had a not quite smell when it hit dirt, like something that had been sleeping too hard for too long. A white paper flapped under the rock by the mailbox, water advisory. They were doing work on a main upstream, a thing broken by age or heat had chosen now. Use caution. Boil for infant formula. Let taps run. The words slimed your throat, even if the water went down like it always had. The paper made the whole street look like a polite emergency. I drove to work and thought of the bag with the inhaler zipper line frozen in time by dirt. There's a particular pity you have for the child you were. A pity you wouldn't spend on anyone else because you know how fussy and moody the kid could be and how impressive his little tragedies looked in his hands. I saw him sitting on the curb with his bike helmet in the grass, mad because he couldn't make air the way other kids did with their mouths open, because making air shouldn't be a job. In the dock, the third bay stuck again. It does that when the rollers get gummy, so the door stutters, and something in the chain learns that hitch and goes looking for it every time. I took the cover off and wiped old grease out with rags that should have been clean and weren't. The radio in the dock office played older rock where you know the words without pride. A compressor came on in the far end of the building with a click, and then another click, and then a click that didn't belong. I waited for it to repeat. It did. I followed it like a dog on a scent. The click wasn't a click, it was a ping. A single bicycle bell somewhere behind a wall that was cinder block and metal stud. I stood there like you stand by a grave and wait for the talk in you to settle, my hand on the warm cinder like someone else's fever. "You good?" Harlan said from the aisle. He pushed a broom slow like he did when the line managers were off the floor and he could pretend the building was his garage. "Yeah," I said, "going to change a switch. It's throwing mischief." "Mischief," he said, and smiled out the side of his mouth. "That's a word we should use more in maintenance logs. We have a whiteboard where we list things that want attention and a whiteboard where we pretend the list is smaller." I wrote, "Bay 3 roller gum, freezer 2 stable after neutral, line 5 thermostat jump, check else if repeats." I carried the word mischief back to my box like a snack. That evening, Carmen dropped Milo on the curb, and didn't he come in because she had an errand that was an errand and not a date. She has this way of telling you the truth for your own good, without sugar, which I appreciate on paper and have learned to take like medicine. Milo's backpack thudded off the seat, and his hair had been cut by a person who cuts hair in a chain store where the chairs are big molded plastic. He waved with the shy economy he uses when the day has been long. "Science kit," he said, already bored of science. "What's the thing?" I said, taking the backpack and heavier than backpack, less personal bag of feelings he didn't want to carry. "Grow crystals," he said, but there was a note that the water. She said, "We can wait." "We can boil," I said. He looked at me like I'd offered to churn butter. "It's fine," he said. "We can wait. We can build the little cardboard lab thing anyway." We built the lab on the kitchen table with tabs and slots while the fan bumped itself with its chain and the fridge held the house's hum. The cardboard made a light sandpaper sound when we slid the pieces together. The kit came with a tiny beaker shaped like a joke. He arranged the packet of powder and the tower that holds it like he was preparing an experiment that would settle a bet. "You want to help me put up fence panels?" I said. "We'll do 3 and call that a whole day's work." "I can hand you screws," he said, not excited but not against me either. The chisel marks on his arm hair where he made a bad decision with the school scissors last spring had grown out. He is getting long, a colt anchoring himself in his own knees and elbows. We went out, and the yard had that late-day light that makes even bald patches look deliberate. The fence line looked like it had been meant to be there. He peered at the hedge, like he expected it to tell him something. He knows the shape my face takes when I am looking at a thing that makes no sense. "What is it?" he said. "Just thinking whether to move the gate a hair," I said. "It will make the swing better, I think." We set the panels after I set him up with a magnetic cup and a sack of screws. He lost 3 and then didn't lose any. He's the sort of person who improves because someone is watching. The drill's clutch clicked politely when the screw heads went home. The wood had a grain you could read with your fingernails if you closed your eyes. Sweat made tracks down his neck, and the collar of his shirt darkened like a map. He set the screw cup down on the corner cap with the due oval. "Cold," he said, and lifted it. He put his palm there and then pulled back. "That's weird," he said, not alarmed, just a scientist already. "It's like the glass my milk used to be in when you kept the fridge colder." "It's the light," I said. "In the evening the corners stay in shadow." He nodded because he believes me in the way a person believes an adult who looks like they know how to keep a house from falling on your head. "You know there's a hole under the hedge," he said, bending and squinting. "Animals," I said. "They like the shade." He put his head near the leaves and then shot back a little, not scared, just not expecting. "It's cold," he said. "The air in there feel." I got down on one knee and parted the hedge. My face went into leaf and twig, and the faint, bitter smell of something that pretends to be pretty and has a bite under it for whoever reaches too hard. The air in the hollow was cool, as if a bag of ice had sat there under a towel. Not cool all over. Cool with edges, a pocket of polite presence you could almost hear if you thought air could hum. "Maybe the sprinkler gets in there," I said. "Evaporation. Physics." "Science," he said, and smiled his small smile at the corner of his mouth that looks like mine when mine is not busy. Carmen texted she was picking him up early in the morning because his grandmother wanted to see him. The word grandmother has a gravity that cancels your plans. We ate spaghetti in front of a show where houses are improved, then washed the dishes because he is on dish week at his mother Ises, and we keep people consistent between houses so they don't learn to game us, even if secretly we game each other in adult ways with money. He slept on the couch because the air in his room runs hot until 3 in the morning when the unit forgets its job and overdoes it. He sprawled into the angle between cushions like he knew more about rest than I did. I sat up later than I needed and read about our water. The article said the main had sediment disturbances, which is how I would describe me when Carmen left. It said not enough to cause harm, and then, if you were very small, you should boil. Like the very small needed extra care, because they had not had enough practice. I dreamed less that night, or I don't remember it. Dawn had sounds in it that belong to older places than ours. Bird calls that act like trees still speak their names out loud. Tires whispering the first commuters along the big road past the tract. The corner cap showed its coin. When I touched it, my finger came away with damp that didn't feel like humidity. It felt like a sheet pulled back off a cold face. I got on my hands and knees and dug in the loose fill dirt, where I hadn't tamped or finished like a raccoon, and came up with a Hot Wheels car I had owned when carpet had been desert. The paint had chipped exactly where the wheel well flared. The way I did it when I told myself a scratched car is a real car, and then didn't believe myself. I held it like an artifact. A neighbor's garage popped open 2 doors down. Someone's radio did the morning show laugh. The hedge held a smell in it like cold peppermint rubbed on a coin. I put the car on the cap because there was a superstitious in me that wasn't tea polite, and then felt foolish and pocketed it. I had to be to work by 7. The sun dabbed a bit of heat under my collar on the walk to the truck. The air tasted like a belt left in a hot car. On the way out of the development, a city truck sat by the corner and 2 men stared into a hole in the street with their hands on their hips in the way you learn from your father and he learned from his. A hose snaked from the truck into the hole and hissed through its teeth. One of them looked up and put 2 fingers to his brow because the little salute is muscle memory, not about me. There was an orange sign that said, "Water Crew, slow." At work, the freezer was well behaved, and the docks sulked. The door that stuck again, and then behaved like it had learned shame. I moved through the building like you move through a busy kitchen, with hands tucked and eyes on other people's elbows. I liked the simple rule of it. Don't be where something is about to be. We got a note in our email that said to conserve during peak, and somebody pinned a paper to the break room corkboard like warnings belong on cork. The coffee taste slid weird. Someone said they could taste the main work without being told. Placebo, Harlan said. Or you're a dog. I'm a dog, the someone said. The scanner guns ran their little songs, and sometimes between 2 of them I heard the bell again. A single bright thing that made you think of sidewalks cooling down and your shirt stuck to your arms. On my way out to the yard for air, I checked the board where they had the lease schedules for the trucks and the list somebody kept as a joke of who had said the dumbest thing that week. The sun in the gap was white, and the smell of hot pine pallets rose like dessert. A forklift beeped, and the driver had set a radio in the cup holder, playing a ball game from some city where humidity is a sport. From the street side of our fence came the sound of a bicycle moving, but not on asphalt, moving on the gravel strip where weeds fight fair. A single bell, not new. I felt that sound touch the inside of my wrist where my pulse lives. I saw a flash of chrome and a hand like a little bird's hand, round knuckles and a bit of scab on the pointer finger, because children's hands are a map of minor errors. Then the bike was gone because the world has other people in it, and not all of them are ghosts. I stayed until the light in that strip behind the building turned the color of beer foam. I went home past the water crew still at the corner. Different men, the same hole. The sign sagged a little like signs do by end of day. A woman in a visor pushed a stroller and looked at the hole, as if it might answer a question she didn't want to ask anyone with a name. At home, the fence looked good and new in the way new things do, slightly wrong because their edges haven't learned dust. The hedge held its green like a secret. I knelt by the place where I had dug a little like a raccoon and pulled the soil back and found a plastic ring I had worn at a carnival. The gemstone a molded oval of green with a scratch through it that made 2 planes of fake. I sat back on my heels and wiped it on my shorts and slid it on my pinky because it would only go there now. "You're kidding me," I said to no one, which is the way men talk when they want the world on record. The ring had no right. I hadn't lived here as a child. I had lived across town off a two-lane that had been widened twice, where ranch houses and big trees made a kind of promise. The tract I live in now used to be a field of something, corn probably, and then a series of decisions made on paper. The line of this fence followed a property map filed by a man who'd never been here. Nothing under it should know me. I dug more because not digging felt like walking away from a person who had reached out. The dirt gave reluctantly, slumping back to level as if it resented my fingers. I found a coin from the county fair with a pig stamped on it, and the year that I had gone with my father and ridden the tilt-a-whirl until my breath forgot how to count. The coin should have been anywhere else. I stopped. There is a flavor of self-harm that is only curiosity. I sat on the grass where it felt most like straw and thought about calling my mother and asking if we had visited anyone in this part of town, if any friend had a backyard with a hedge where I might have crawled and stashed bits of my little life. But she answers in paragraphs and gets sad when I bring up my father, and I didn't have the prep for that. Also, the answer would be no. We hadn't known these streets when their names were fields. I filled the hole with my hand and tamped it with the dirt tamp the rental had given me like a compliment I hadn't asked for. I washed my hands at the spigot, even though the paper said caution, because there, S caution, and there, S not losing your mind. The water ran with the little cough it does when old pipes wake, then smooth. My palms smelled like chemicals that pretend to be mint and memory that pretends to be true. That night the unit rattled in a way that means the squirrel cage has fuzz on it, and I put that on the list in my kitchen where I write things to future me. Titan living room fan, vacuum return, call M about gate. The pencil made little whispers on paper. On the couch my son turned over and made a noise from the part of sleep where you fight a little and don't know why. I dreamed about a gate, not mine. Tall, painted a color no one can name without a paint chip. On the other side of the gate a little me stood with a bike helmet in one hand and the other hand on the gate, like he was considering, truly considering, whether rules applied to whoever he was now. I woke just before he decided. The house offered me its noises, compressor click, fridge hum, the tiny tick of a pipe cooling in the wall where hot water had just gone, and then not. At dawn the advisory flapped again, now with a red stamp across the bottom, like someone wanted to show this day had a signature. The corner cap kept its coin. I pressed my palm there and counted backward from 10, and the cold held to 5, and then agreed to join everyone else. Milo woke with his hair in a half circle on his head and eyes that wanted pancakes. "We go to Grandma's," he said, and that was both future and fact. "You want to see the crystals before you go?" I said. "We didn't do the water," he said. "We can do it Sunday." "We'll do it Sunday," I said, and wanted Sunday like a person wants rain in July. After they left, the house had a space in it like the absence after a laugh. I stood in the kitchen and let the fridge hum steady me. I looked at the fence like you look at a photograph of yourself under good light where you believe the picture because it doesn't try too hard to be flattering. The hedge moved like someone exhaled behind it. Then it didn't. I should have mowed. I should have gone to the store and bought more screws and the little caps they sell to pretend a fence can be more than wood. Instead, I took the hand trowel and went along the line and dug shallow scoops every 6 feet like a man looking for a seam in a floor. Sometimes I found nothing but earth that had the texture of brown cake, and sometimes I found something that looked like the bottom of a cup. I found a plastic soldier missing his gun, 2 buttons that do not belong on a child's shirt, and a pencil with my bite marks in the paint. The dirt along the chalk line, now a ghost of chalk, had a policy: return by appointment. At the exact middle between 2 posts, I found the corner of a Polaroid. The chemistry had gone wrong. The picture was mostly black. But on the left edge, a sliver of a porch step and a shoe that had been mine. Round toe, 2 Velcro straps, mud on the left strap because I had tripped hard and held it there as a strategy. The back had no writing. Polaroids teach you that not writing is a kind of erasure. I put the photo in the pocket of my t-shirt like I might carry a pen. I sat on the new bottom rail and felt it hold like the right answer to a bad question. The hedge let a small cough catch and then clear. I shut my eyes and saw the kitchen of the house I grew up in, and the curve of my mother's shoulder when she leaned against the counter, and the glass she kept her slips under so air wouldn't move them. When I opened them, the corner cap was fogged. Not dew, but fog, like a breath had pressed itself there and refused to be wind. I stood and touched it and felt the chill translate directly up my arm, as if I'd put my fingers on a mouth that had smelled of peppermint and aluminum for 30 years. I went inside and sat at the table with the water advisory and a notepad and drew the yard. I drew the line of the fence and made little X's where I dug and initials by what I found, because if you turn a haunting into a list, you can trick yourself into thinking you've got it corralled. I drank coffee and tasted metal because now I would taste metal in anything clear. The AC hiccuped and the vent rattled a penny cessworth somewhere I would not get to without a ladder I didn't tone. I was still at the table when the doorbell went, an old mechanical ding-dong that came with the house and sounds like a polite person clearing their throat twice. On the step stood a woman with a clipboard and a shirt with HOA stitched small at the pocket, not the head. One of her helpers. She had a kindness around her mouth that comes from wanting people to like you but knowing you are the messenger. "Good morning," she said. "I'm doing reminders, not enforcements today." She tapped the clipboard. "Saw your posts. Good on you. Some folks are dragging their feet." "Thanks," I said. "I should get it done by Saturday." "Would you mind if I took a quick picture for the file?" she said. "So we know who is making progress." "Go ahead," I said, and had the childish wish to be praised in public. She stepped into the yard, and her shoes sank a hair, because this earth does not want dress shoes. She took the picture, and then looked at the hedge, because the hedge captures attention without trying. "Funny," she said. "We had a map that said there was a drainage easement running closer to your line. But the man who marked it," she waved in a direction that took in City Hall and the feed store and maybe also the sky, "said it had been changed." "Changed when?" I said. "Before my time," she said, and all of us stand in that sentence all day long. "Do you have any water pooling?" "No," I said, "not that I've seen." "Then there's a spot where it stays cool, at the corner. Not water, just cold." "Cold is nice," she said, and stepped back to the drive so she wouldn't have to call any of what I said what it was. "I'll mark you as in progress. Good work." After she left, I went back to the table and drew a little circle on the corner of my yard where Cold lived. I felt foolish, and as soon as the pencil left the paper, I felt less foolish because now the circle lived somewhere else too. I went to the store for cement mix and for more screws and stood a while too long in the aisle with the filters because the water advisory had shifted something in me. A young man in a vest asked if I needed help with the sharp cheer of someone whose managers call it selling, but whose paycheck is groceries and gas. I said I was deciding between a picture of a drop and a picture of a mountain on 2 boxes that cost the same. He nodded solemnly, as if I had confessed a mortal question. At home, I mixed cement in the pan I'd used to lay pavers by the back spigot and troweled it around footings like frosting that didn't care what it looked like. Sweat dropped off my nose and disappeared into grey like an offering. I thought of antiquity and corners of walls people touch for luck, thumbprints in stone polished by hundreds of wishes. The afternoon swelled and then loosened its tie. A truck backfired 3 streets over, and in the pause after I heard the bicycle bell again, a single ping that arrived in my chest before my ear. I stepped to the hedge. In the green shadow the air made its little creak of cold. I crouched and breathed it like you breathe on a very hot day when you open the freezer and stick your face in, not because the air is better, but because it's different. There was a handle on the other side. Not a handle, a grip. The plastic curve of a bicycle handle with a stripe worn by a thumb. It sat where a hand could find it if it were blind and wanted to steady itself. I reached. I expected to feel my own garage handle, the smooth of a new toy. The plastic was old slick, the particular gloss of things that have been touched by kids and sun and time. My thumb fell into the place my thumb should fall because the ridge there had been made by my thumb. If you've never had the experience of laying your finger into the groove you made as a child on an object you have not seen for 30 years in a yard where you did not grow up, I don't recommend it. The world does a tilt. You grab for furniture in the room and there is only air. The hedge smelled very green and very bitter and was also the lid of a Tupperware with celery inside my mother kept in the fridge when she was trying to make us all be better. I held the handle and didn't move it. The breeze made a sound in the leaves that could have been a person small and patient. I let go and the hedge sighed in relief because hedges are not built to be occasions. I stood up and placed my palm on the corner cap. Cold held. The oval now had the faint shape of lines a child S hand makes because a child S pad doesn't cover everything and each finger leaves its own little note. That night I didn't turn the TV on. The unit blew and bumped and I lay and counted the bumps like sheep with metal bones. Around 11 the house made a sound like paper pulled slow from a roll. I got up and went to the kitchen and stood with the water running because sometimes hot noise pushes back against hot noise. Outside, a light moved across my fence the way a bike headlamp moves, if someone is careful not to be seen through the slots between slats. There was no crunch of gravel. There was the faintest tick of a freewheel coasting. At the door I set my hand on the lock and didn't turn it, because when we can name something, we set rules around it. If I opened the door and there was a child in my yard who looked like me when I was 7, there is no guidebook for whether you invite him in to sit on your couch and watch you not breathe. The overnight cooled a little like a fever that is still a fever, but knows you're watching. I slept in pieces, 10-minute stitches, dream. My father carrying me and saying, "Easy, easy, breathe." But in the dream he is younger than me now, and that makes him so very small I could put him in the laundry basket and carry him to the car myself. Waking, the clock's soft plastic click when its minute dies and another takes the sheet. The hall smelled like soap we don't use in this house. On Friday, the water notice changed to say we were fine to drink again, and also you should run your taps to clear any residuum, a word that wants to be prettier than it is. The men folded the sign and drove the truck, and the hole in the street had a round metal lid that says a company S name. The tamper made the asphalt go smooth, and you couldn't tell anything had been done unless you were the street, and you remembered everything. I called my mother. She answered with her breath, like she'd been waiting and then pretending she hadn't. "Jack," she said, and in that one syllable she had how tall I am and how often I call and how much money I pretend I have and how tired I sound. "Mom," I said, "did we ever go to the other side of town when I was a kid?" "South of the river, the part with the new developments now." "We had no reason," she said. "Your father hated the turnpike at rush hour. Why?" I told her a version that made it luck and trash and nothing that would bring us to the place she goes when she thinks about my father. "Funny coincidence," I said. "People move," she said, and in that was grace for strangers and herself. "Do you remember a blue inhaler with a dinosaur sticker?" I said. "Of course," she said, and I saw her at the sink peeling the sticker off little by little because she hated stickers on anything. "You had so many. That brand made you shake. You liked the one with the peppermint smell. We stopped, remember? Dr. Price said it would be fine, but I didn't like the shakes." "Peppermint," I said. "I remember." "Do you have yours?" she said. her voice coming around the corner of the question the way she does when she lets the mother out. "I keep one," I said. "I'm fine." "You sound good," she said. "You sound busy. You sound like summer." We were quiet, not because we had nothing, but because the stair between now and then is steep. "I need to get to work," I said. "I'll come Sunday. Maybe take Milo to the creek if it's not too dry." "Bring him," she said. "I have popsicles." At work, I changed the return filter on the roof and brushed bees off with a hand I pretended was calm, while the roof wrestled heat, and the sky above it gave me nothing but more. The building's air felt kind to me when I went back down. The forklift driver put his radio on a station with call-in dedications, and a woman called to tell her boyfriend Marcus that she was sorry about the thing with his cousin. "Some of that is for me," Harlan said dry, and ran his broom in a stripe up the dock that made dignity out of dust. I thought about buying a padlock for the new gate, but felt like that would be an insult to whatever had decided to visit. I went home, and the sun made a theatre of the fence. The hedge's green went to almost black. At the corner, my cold coin kept its job so faithfully, I felt mean for checking it every time I passed. I ate beans on toast and thought, my life is a man's life, and by that I mean it is made of serviceable mistakes taken from a bin by the door. After dark, I stepped into the yard and the sound of the suburb laid itself over me. Air conditioner throats, a dog who wants inside, a car door closed soft because someone small is sleeping. I sat on the bottom rail again and put my hand in the hedge hollow, like you put your hand in a jacket pocket you haven't worn since the season changed. The handle was there, and it was exactly not surprising. I leaned until my forehead touched leaves, and I asked an out-loud question with my breath, not my voice. "What do you want?" The hedge gave me basil and coin and something else, a chill like a pan pulled from the freezer and set on the stove. I dreamed not at all, and in the morning felt punishment for it like I'd eaten and not said grace. Saturday is the day people mow in unison, and the whole street did. The smell of cut grass and gas exhaust made a green haze. The mail came with a coupon book like a phone book shrunk in the wash, full of pictures of meat and smiling dentists. There was a second envelope with HOA loops. I let it sit on the counter and then I didn't. I opened it. It was a reminder, friendly and strict. The deadline sits for everyone on a calendar you cannot move. I put on my hat and finished the panels. I put on the caps and tapped them with the palm of my hand so they would feel invited. I used the level when I didn't need to because a little part of me is a show-off. The hedge made a little breeze that felt like relief. When I was done, the yard looked smaller and the way rooms look smaller when you paint them because now your eye has less to escape through. I swept the walkway and the broom made that good sand sound that means order. When I looked for the inhaler, because by now you search things you know will not be there, it was not there. Not on the corner cap, not in the grass, not anywhere. The oval was. In the afternoon, I lay on the cool floor inside because the floor is the only honest thing when the house is this hot. The fan ticked, the fridge hummed, the clock did not tick because it is digital, but in my ear it made the little step sound anyway. The world went white at the edges, the way it does before a storm. No storm came. At dusk I heard the bicycle. The bell pinged once, like a sentence you wouldn't argue with. I stood and went to the hedge and parted leaves. And there, on the other side of the fence, because the fence did not stop any of this, stood a boy straddling a small bike with chrome fenders that have lost much of their chrome, but not all. He wore a shirt with a dinosaur that was not a sticker. He had a scar on his chin. He held the inhaler in both hands, like something you hold when you are told if you lose it, you will be in trouble. We looked at each other through 6 inches of green and new pine. He didn't speak. He looked like me the year before, the year my father died. For a second, the ground did not feel like it was going to cooperate with gravity. I put my hand on the corner cap because that is what you do when the room tilts. Touch something. It was cold enough to make my teeth ache, and lately everything has a way of moving directly to my teeth. "Hey," I said. I do not enjoy my voice in charged moments. It always sounds rented. He tipped his head like a dog who can tell cadence if not content. The bell sat on his handlebar, old steel with a thumb lever that sticks because dirt lives in hinge. He didn't ring it. He didn't go. He looked at my hand on the cap and put one of his there mirrored, and we both felt the cold and watched the small ovals of damp overlap, and then separate, and then overlap again, when I moved my hand a hair to the left to match him. You are not supposed to reach through hedges to touch little boys, even if they are you. You are not supposed to invite them in your house where the fridge hums and the fan ticks and the AC pretends to know what it is doing. You are not supposed to be born twice. So I removed my hand, and the world put itself back where it had been for other people. Be careful, I said, because that is what fathers say when the words they need are out of stock. He nodded because that is what sons do when they've already decided to disobey you gently. He squeezed the inhaler and the plume went between the leaves and the fence slats and laid against my cheek like a cold hand on a hot face. Peppermint. Aluminum. A blue that is really white that your brain calls blue because you want it to be strong. Then he was gone, not dramatically, just incrementally. One wheel, a handle, a shoulder. Green stopped moving. Air filled in like concrete around a post. I slept like someone who had done an honest day's work that included a little lying. Sunday came in polite. Carmen texted and we negotiated Milo's time like we always do, with respect and suspicion, and tiny victories the other can't see. I made coffee, and when I went to the back door, the coin on the cap was bigger, not by much enough that I knew we had turned our wheel and this road would be this road for a while. Sunday smelled like hose water and wet towels. I packed sandwiches in wax paper because foil makes sweat taste like pennies, and Milo and I drove out to the creek that calls itself a creek even in August when it amounts to a long, wet thought. The cottonwoods there throw shade like they own the idea. Cicadas buzz in a pitch that makes the back of your jaw hum. We parked in the dusty triangle by the sign that tells you about native fish with cartoons. A boy, a little older than Milo, carried a bucket full of minnows that flickered like coins. You could see the water advisory idea hanging in the air even out here, no one speaking it, everyone making their choices around it. A couple knelt and washed a dog and then looked around like someone might ticket them. We walked upstream along the stones that are flat enough if you tell your ankles to be good. The mud at the edge had dried into plates with the curled lip you see on old bread. We sat on a log and ate. And my son told me about how in social studies they watched a video about unnatural borders, and he wanted to know why grown-ups couldn't draw a line without it cutting something important in half. Because grown-ups draw like that, I said, and drew with my hand an L in the air, sharp corners, and important things don't lie down in a grid. He looked at me with the face that is good at calling me out without words. You're doing a fence, he said. Right, I said, but I didn't draw the line. I just make sure it stands where somebody else decided it should. He tossed a crust into water, and we watched two minnows argue whether crumbs count as food. Grandma says the old neighborhood used to flood, he said, picking at a scab on his knee he was trying to keep from being a scar. She said people would paint lines on the door frames where it got to. People like to mark things, I said. Even if the mark is bad news. It's like if you draw around it, you can keep it from moving. He leaned his shoulder against mine. Birds thunked in the leaves the way big leaves do when life happens in them. He said, without prelude, Mom told me you couldn't breathe when you were little. Sometimes, I said, but usually I could. Sometimes I needed help. What did it feel like? He wasn't morbid. He was curious in the way kids are before they learn adults change color at certain subjects. Like running hard when you haven't warmed up, I said. Like that stitch you get, except nothing was running and it got mad at me anyway. He thought about that. "I can run far," he said, like he was offering to keep oxygen in the family. "You can," I said. "You're good at pacing." He nodded like I'd said something he already knew, and was pleased to hear me catch up. Then he said, "Can I climb the log?" And I said sure, and he went and did the thing boys have done forever, make a ship out of a tree 2 feet above ground. On the way back, we passed the pump house where a small, steady mechanical sound makes the world feel grown up. The door was propped, and inside a guy in a county shirt leaned against a pipe, reading an instruction folded open to the part where the diagrams go grayscale, like they retired. He looked up and raised his chin in a hello that said, "We were all doing our best with pipes. When we got home, the house had remembered how to be cool in the afternoon if you keep curtains drawn. I boiled water for the crystal kit, like the advisory flyer had taught, and poured it into the tiny beaker. All that small, purposeful science made me feel better. We watched powder make a tornado and then disappear like good magic, and Milo stuck the wick thing in and set the beaker in the cardboard tower. It's like a city," he said. "But if it grew instead of got built." He left with Carmen, and the house lost 2 degrees of sound. I washed the beaker because washing small things makes big things tolerable. I stepped into the yard. The fence line had settled into the place new things go, a slot in your eye you didn't know you had. The hedge held still like someone listening. The coin on the cap waited like a question on a form you pretend you did not see. I set my palm there and counted to 10 again, and again it held to 5 and then softened. I went to the hedge and put my face in, breathing the basil bitter and the damp. The handle was there. Not every time. 8 out of 10, enough to make the times it wasn't feel like insult. I didn't move it. I didn't say the boy's name, my name, because names do things. Monday. The air inside the building at work felt clean as a lie you tell for someone else's good. The manager of the night shift left a note that the freezer had jumped 2 degrees before dawn, and then corrected, "And could we keep an eye?" I wrote on the whiteboard, "Eyes kept." Harlan smirked. He was working on a floor scrubber that has moods. "You know what I learned after 12, he said, arm deep in the thing's guts. "Machines are like people. If you got 2 problems at once, one is pretending to be the other." "What's pretending here?" I said. "Thermostat pretending to be a gasket," he said. "Or other way around. I'll know when it makes me look dumb." At noon, the power flickered not all the way off, just enough to make everything in the building remember it was awake. The compressors sighed, the lights blinked, the scanners threw little tantrums and had to be placated. In the drop between down and back up, I heard the bell again. Ping single. From the loading dock side, the strip of gravel and weeds that runs parallel to the fence line like a sentence in small print. I looked and saw nothing but chain-link glare and a length of cattail where there shouldn't be any. Harlan watched me watching. "You hear something," he said. "Neighborhood," I said, "kid." "School's in," he said, consulting the calendar in his head where his daughters live. "Half days this week, though. Admin day, teacher planning or whatnot." I went outside and stood by the fence and put my hand on the steel. It had been in the sun and was a griddle. I moved down to where a sliver of shade made a cool patch like a bad bandage. Somewhere on the other side something small was metal and still. I could feel it in the way heat moves around objects. I told myself I was being ridiculous, and I wasn't entirely wrong. On the drive home, a notice flashed on the community board by the entrance. "Sheer quality moderate, limit outdoor activity." The lights on the board sometimes blink out of sync with the words, so you catch limit and outdoor and activity separately and fill in your own caution. The yard smelled like hot green. I pulled a weed by the gate that had been too ambitious, and my fingers came away smelling like something medicinal, like the band-aids of my childhood. The corner coin was there. I pressed it and had the small, indecent thought that it would feel like a child's cheek if a cheek were a piece of weather. At supper, I ate the leftover beans and a heel of bread and washed the plate and set it in the rack with 2 others because that is the way we pretend we are halfway through work instead of done. The house offered me its noises and I said yes to them like a person says yes to being told to breathe at the doctor. I slept early and woke at 2 with the specific alertness that comes not from a noise but from your body deciding it is a noise. I went to the back door and stood with my hand on the lock again. The dark had texture. Light from the tracks across the drainage brush painted the fence in slats. The coin on the cap held a small moon, not real moon because the real moon was elsewhere. Light bounced off something human-made. I opened the door because sometimes you have to break your own rule to feel like it's yours and not a rule that owns you. I stepped out. The air had a thinness in it like soup strained twice. The hedge hummed with insect talk you don't hear until you stand still. I eased onto the bottom rail. The wood still kept a day's heat like a back. I leaned in and put my hand where the handle ought to be and felt it set itself in my grip like a handshake from someone in a photograph. I pulled. It didn't pull back. It wasn't stuck. It was placed like a thing set carefully where it keeps more than one time in balance. I let go. I sat with my head in the leaves until the air in the hedge coldened my teeth. I thought of my father's hands, which were always cleaner than mine no matter what he had been doing. I thought of the last time a person carried me, and I let them. In the morning, a new paper arrived under the rock. City Water Update. They told us the work was complete. There was a sentence about dislodged legacy sediment, which sounds like a metaphor for grief, and is probably just pipes. They suggested we flush lines. They told us the color some people might have seen is normal for a day or 2 and will pass. At work, the manager brought donuts as penance for the flicker. My hand hovered over the box and then didn't. Sugar would have turned my tongue to paste in this heat. I drank water and tasted the phantom penny anyway. Harlan and I pulled the panel on freezer 2 and the sight glass showed bubbles when it should have shown a clear eye. "There's your belch," he said. We bled the line and the compressor tones smoothed. "Listen," he said, "how it gets less self-conscious. Like when you make a joke about the thing everybody is trying not to mention. There's a lot of that going around," I said. "You mean in this building or this country?" he said, not really wanting me to answer. On my break, I stood by the pallet stacks where the smell of wood gets sharp when cut ends face the sun. I looked down the alley of the fence line, and for a second, the view doubled. The chain link I was staring through, and a wood slat fence like mine, only grey with age, its lower rails chewed by time and sprinklers. It was only a second, a trick of heat and chain pattern and my brain needing to be dramatic. When it resolved back to 1, I had my hands out, palms forward in a gesture that could be either wait or I'm harmless. Anyone watching would have thought I was practicing for a traffic stop. On Wednesday, I called the rental place and asked if I could keep the auger until Saturday because the gate still needed hanging and I didn't want to get stuck. Travis thumbed his book and said, "Just bring it back when it looks like you're done." When I returned it, he said, "You hear about the break-in?" And I said no, because that is always a conversation with a stranger. "A house 4 streets over. Somebody climbed a fence and opened a sliding door and didn't take a thing," he said, like he was trying to figure out how to categorize it. "Left muddy prints on the kids' floor. Little prints," the mom said. "Kids make prints," I said. "Police said they couldn't tell if the prints were new or from before. The carpet takes a mark if it's damp and it stays for a while. And in this weather, everything's damp. It's like the house keeps a photo of whoever walks in." "I'll keep my door locked," I said. "Doors are a suggestion," he said, and looked pleased with the line until he remembered he sold locks in the side aisle. The gate hung easy, and then didn't. I adjusted the hinges. The sweep scraped at one edge, like it had an opinion about which way it wanted to swing. When it finally settled and the latch clicked sweet, I felt a satisfaction that has nothing to do with ghosts, a thing built. The oval on the cap stayed cold through the heat, like it had been instructed to be itself until further notice. That night, I dreamed about my father, not directly, but his tools. The socket set in the blue tin with the lid that never shut without shimmy. The red-handled screwdriver he told me not to use as a chisel, and I did. The smell of the little oil can, sweet and metallic, that lived under the sink. I woke with those in my nose, like a person could be a smell if you needed them bad enough. On Thursday, the HOA sent another letter, and this one was an inspection appointment. Friday at 10. Friendly and strict. The signature looped. The little printed list at the bottom had a box next to fencing in compliance, and a box next to landscaping maintenance, and a box next to exterior paint in harmony. I put it on the counter under the bowl and then moved it to the fridge with a magnet, because certain pressure does better when it looks at you while you make coffee. At 9:58 on Friday, the same woman as before stepped around the hedge and into the yard, and I felt myself blush because I could think of nothing but the handle behind those leaves, and how if the world decided to take humor at my expense, it would offer it to her. She checked the line with an eye you hire for that, and smiled her kind mouth. "Looks good," she said, pencil out. "You'll get a letter that says so." "Thank you," I said, and meant it harder than made sense. She stepped to the corner where the cap kept its coin. She put the back of her hand there like you do at a forehead. "You've got shade here," she said, friendly, strict, eyes going to my hedge without stopping. "Shade makes cooler spots." "It does," I said. She took her hand away and looked at the mark it left, the oval of damp around her knuckles, like she'd put them on a cold beer. She made a small face that wasn't doubt and wasn't belief. It was the face people make when they step off a curb that wasn't a curb. Then she smiled again and wrote "compliant" in her box and left a piece of carbon paper impression on my day. At work that afternoon, Harlan asked me if I would take Saturday morning overtime because a delivery got moved up. "They want to have the numbers right, and I don't want to babysit that dock alone," he said. "I've got inspection letters to frame," I said, "but I can come in until noon." He raised his broom in salute. "They give me one of those letters," he said. "I'll tape it to my door where the eviction notice used to go. Feels like symmetry." Saturday morning the building had a different sound, emptier, like a big store before it opens. We moved pallets in a choreography of beeps. The scanners chirped. One died. I swapped its battery. It lived. At 10 there was a lull. I walked out to the strip by the fence and the heat wasn't high yet, the kind of morning that mutters mercy. The chain link cast its grid shadow on gravel. In the shadow, the squares doubled, like the fence couldn't decide which half of the day it belonged to. A bicycle bell pinged. Not near, not far. It was like the bell had been rung in a different room and the sound had traveled through the ductwork. I looked where it asked me to, and of course saw nothing but a few tufts of weeds, so intent on living, they made you embarrassed for your lack of it. I put my fingers through the diamond of the fence and thought of the corner cap, the cool that comes up through wood like a stubborn opinion. I said out loud, "I can't help you if you don't tell me," and then flinched because talking aloud makes things a degree more real. Nobody answered. The day opened its hand and we moved more pallets, and then it was noon and the world had other work for me. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery and stood in front of the freezer case where ice cream calls itself necessary. The glass had that white film on the inside at the top where the air decides to settle. A boy in a blue shirt with a dinosaur on it stared into the case from the next aisle over, reflection mixed with product. He touched the glass with his fingertips and left little ovals that evaporated slow. I stood there longer than a man needs to stand by ice cream. The boy's mother told him to pick, and he pointed to something too red. At home, I lay on the floor until the AC admitted it was losing. I drank water. I pressed my hand to the corner cap and said, "Okay," because sometimes that is how programmatic as I get. I took the trowel and a bucket and knelt by the hedge and dug where I had not dug, just beyond the post line where the chalk would have faded if there had been chalk to fade. The earth gave me a cap from a glass bottle with dots stamped around the rim, an old brand that changed its lid a long time ago, flattened by years. I found a twist tie, stiff with rust, the paper gone. I found a grocery token from a store that does not exist. And I found a pocket knife with a broken blade and initials scratched into the plastic scale, i.e., which aren't mine, and I felt relief that not everything is me. I was about to stop because there is an ugly pleasure in finding things that grows in the search and can swallow you. The trowel struck plastic. I lifted and dirt slid off a lid the size of a lunchbox, milky white gone tan. Not an actual lunchbox, a tub. The kind of tub people keep decks of cards in, or human hair if they are the sort to keep hair, or instructions for appliances long dead. I pried with the trowel until the seal broke with a small little sigh that is the same sigh plastics make in winter when you open them. Inside, cloth, a child's t-shirt, blue once, now the blue you get when the sun has looked at you too long. On the front, a dinosaur that had peeled and flaked but could still be named. Under the shirt, a stack of Polaroids. The top one showed a boy on a porch, squinting, holding an inhaler like a prayer and a dare. Behind him, a man's hand on a shoulder, not a face in frame. The boy had a scar on his chin. On the back, in my mother's all caps, first day third. Under the photos, a small metal bell, not a bike bell, a hand bell, the kind a teacher uses when children get away from her. The bell was dull, but when I set it in my palm, I could feel the cool, not as temperature, but as shape, the way metal stores weather. I lifted it out. It wasn't heavy. It had a crack like a paper cut. I tipped it and something inside moved, not the clapper because there was no clapper, but a little piece of grit someone had saved by accident. At the bottom, a checkbook register from a bank with a name that got bought by another and then another, numbers, columns, filled in a neat, careful hand. The last line stopped mid-entry. I.E. again in the margin. Whoever I.E. was had not been a child. I sat back on my heels and felt that little dance dizziness does. I looked at the Polaroid again and tried not to think what it feels like to sit on a porch while someone tells you the day is new and you should smile that way for the camera. The hedge exhaled, a cold that touched the bell and turned it into a little reservoir on my palm. I stood and put the bell on the corner cap with a care that felt like ritual. The sound it made was almost not a breath metal makes when it touches wood. The oval on the cap swelled like a weather map. I stepped back. Between the panels of the fence, there is just enough gap to see the idea of a person. Someone stood on the other side, neither near nor far, the way shadows choose a distance. A bicycle peg flashed at an ankle, and then you couldn't say if you had seen it. "I can't help you," I said quietly, so that the other neighbors wouldn't add me to their lists. The hedge said nothing. The air in it stayed cool like the breath of a freezer when you open it and immediately regret the spill of money. Sunday afternoon, Milo came back with the beaker and the crystals, which had grown like a city that guessed wrong about where people would live. He set it on the table and then peered at the edge where it had climbed the wick. "It made a shape it wasn't supposed to," he said, a scientist already. "Everything does," I said. "We're just worse at admitting it." "Can we show Grandma?" he said. "She likes shiny." "We will," I said. And we did. At my mother says, the air smelled like onions cooking slow, and the living room had the light it always has, a warm gold that decides your mood for you. She hugged Milo like he was a thing someone had lent her, and she had to be very careful not to break. She hugged me careful too, because you can tell her everything, and she will still evaluate your breathing through your t-shirt. She took one look at the crystals and said, "We grew alum when we were girls, but it didn't look as dangerous. She set the beaker on the counter like a precious where boys can't reach, and rummaged in a drawer, and came out with a manila envelope. "I was cleaning," she said. "I know you think I never do. I found these. You should probably have them." She set the envelope on the table. The flap had the delicate gum of envelopes older than your phone. Inside, more Polaroids. The porch. The hand. Me the size of a lie you tell to avoid worse lies. A picture of a bike with chrome fenders that shines like it believes in itself. The bell on the handlebar, old steel with a thumb lever that sticks. My father's boots in one corner of one photo, just the toes, the leather scuffed like honesty. She took one and tapped it with her nail. "You did that inhale thing on the step, and then threw up because peppermint on an empty stomach is not a plan," she said. "Your father carried you in, and I cleaned the step. He said, 'It's good, he's learning.' And I said, 'He could learn without scaring me to death.'" "You have a good memory for the lines," I said. "Well," she said, "some lines dig their own trenches." We ate that slow onion dinner, and Milo asked her about the floodline, and she took him to the doorframe and showed him the marks we had kept and the ones we had painted over and still kept because paint is a lie you let stand when it is trying to be kind. He ran his fingers where water had gone and said, "It's like skin after the sun," and she told him he was right and then cut him a popsicle. On the way home, the truck smelled like old cardboard and sugar, and I listened to my son, a small breath go regular in the seat, and felt a little contempt for my own lungs, which still wanted to do tricks if given a chance. At the house, the coins on the cap looked bigger, though that could be the night catching at Edge's. I tucked Milo in his bed because his room had figured itself out again, and the unit had decided to be generous. I stood listening to his breathing like a thief, and then closed the door and sat at the table with the Polaroids from my mother, S, and the Polaroid from the dirt, and set them side by side. They were not the same porch. They were cousins. My mother, AS, had a cement crack and a rust stain under the rail from where someone hung flower baskets for a season and decided not to in the next. The dirt photo's rail had a knot that looked like an eye. My father's boots were only in the one. In the other, the angle was different, the light different. They were a pair the way an echo is a pair. I slept badly, and when I woke it was Wednesday because somehow Monday and Tuesday got eaten by the same big animal that eats time when all you do is work and make food and keep water and turn thermostats into guesses. The building at work hummed. Harlan had a bandage on his thumb, the shape of an idea gone wrong. "Knife," he said, and then, "I'm getting slow," and then, "Slow is better than not," and then, "Don't write that down." Midday, a new advisory came, not water, air. Stay indoors if sensitive. It had a number beside it like a grade that would shame you if you understood it better. People looked up at the sky with squints that said, "Besides all this, sky." On the dock, a man coughed the cough of someone trying to be polite about it, and then coughed his real cough around the corner of a pallet where he thought no one would hear. I went home and stood by the hedge because somehow that was where I had been going all day. The cold had shape. It reached beyond the cap now, in a small way, like a hand finding the doorframe in the dark. The old blue shirt I had pulled from the tub lay where I had folded it over the bottom rail to dry, and had dried and did not care to move. I picked it up. It smelled like dirt and laundry soap from a brand my mother bought 30 years ago that promised mountain air and never once delivered. "Okay," I said to the hedge. "Here we are." It felt like someone else should have said that first. A host, a father. I leaned in and the handle went into my palm, and this time when I pulled, it gave an inch. The hedge resisted not like wood or wire, but like a reluctance. Air poured out cold enough to make my eyes water. Beyond the leaves, there was space that was not my yard, and not anyone's yard. Thin, like a room emptied for painting, where everything echoes because there is nothing to catch sound. The bicycle bell pinged once, not as a call, but as a confirmation. "Tell me what you want," I said, and then, more to myself, "Tell me what I'm supposed to be in this." I let go, and the gap eased shut quick as breath let out. In the retreating cool, I heard a small cough. I pulled again a fraction and said, "You can come to the porch. I can't go where you are." It was a sentence I had not known I believed until I said it. The hedge did not agree or disagree. The cold held like a person considering a point in a meeting. That night the doorbell pulled its polite 2 notes at a time. No one rings a bell. 10:20 maybe. The kind of hour you only know if you are watching for news or for trespasses. I went to the door, and the porch had its square of mosquito light from 2 houses down. The air smelled like someone's dryer vent, and the sheet scent that pretends outdoors is a chemical. No one stood there. I opened the door because sometimes you have to look at the hole and not just the shadow it throws. On the step, the inhaler, the dinosaur sticker half torn, the white tape with my name and my mother's hand. I picked it up like a person who has learned how to handle snakes. Cold breathed into my fingers through plastic like a fact that doesn't care what you feel about it. I set it on the corner cap. The coin went from oval to circle. The hedge exhaled slow. In the leaves, something bright moved like chrome in weak light. I sat on the step, and the day's heat that had held on fell off suddenly, the way summer lets go when it is tired of itself. In the quiet, I could hear the fan chain tapping the globe in the living room because the window was cracked, and the house wanted me to remember it had duties too. I did not bring the inhaler inside. I left it on the cap all night. In the morning, the plastic held dew inside it like a snow globe that knew only one season. I picked it up and shook it. The ball clacked. I pressed the actuator in the air above the cap and watched the plume settle on the wood and not soak, because wood is stubborn about strangers. The smell snapped me back so fast I had to put my hand to the step. Milo's bus was late, and then not. After he climbed aboard, I noticed across the way Mrs. Carter from number 20 was standing at her hedge, stooping in the way people do when their eyes have stopped saying yes to small details. She waved. I waved. She called, "Do you have a cat?" I said no, and she made a face like someone has to have the cat that shits in her azaleas, and if it wasn't to me, it was someone who needed to hear it. At work, Harlan told me his daughter had woken wheezy, and he sat with her in a bathroom with the shower on hot, like they told us when we were kids. "I'm buying another filter for home," he said. "I don't care if it's a placebo. Placebos work." He scratched the bandage on his thumb and then stopped because he is old enough to know better and young enough to forget. On my break, I went out and stood by the fence and smelled the summer rot behind warehouses where pallets go to die. The hedge that runs behind our building isn't a hedge. It's a line of volunteer trees that don't know they weren't invited. Somewhere inside it, a bird did that call that sounds like someone whistling for a dog. On the air hung that half-scent, half-temperature that has been my companion for a week now. I put my fingers through the chain diamond again and felt a cool that it belonged to steel. There's a thing you learn as a maintenance man. When 2 problems present, they might be 1. When you fix the wrong one, the right one learns to pretend for longer. The fence at home, the fence at work, the water advisory, the air, the hedge, the boy, the bell. I didn't have a diagram with black and white blocks to show me the flow. At home, the inhaler was gone from the corner cap, and in its place the bell from the tub, the handbell, sat upright as if someone had put it there in the precise center, like you do a centerpiece you don't expect anyone to touch. On the cap under it, the circle of cold printed tight like a stencil. I looked at the bell for a long time, because if you look long enough at an object, it will tell you something, not about itself, but about you. I considered picking it up and ringing it. I did not. Bells ask questions of a house. You only want to ask a house so many questions in a day. That evening, Carmen texted, "Are you good? He said you were weird about the hedge." I wrote, "I'm fine," Because that is what you write when someone who knows you well enough to be right wants to discuss something you cannot make come out of your mouth without it sounding like a trick. She wrote, "Don't scare him." And I wrote, "I won't." And I believed myself at the time. At 3 in the morning, not any minute with numbers that feel like story, just 3, dull and honest, I woke to a sound that lived between a cough and a laugh. I went to the door, and the porch light in the distance had a halo on it, like a saint in a cheap painting. On my cap, the bell had tipped like a glass, left too near the edge, by a tired person. At the hedge, the air was cold enough this time to make my breath feel like work. I parted leaves, and there, clear as a photograph you believe only because your mother wrote on the back, was the chrome of a bicycle fender catching a light that did not exist in my yard. I reached for the handle and found it and pulled, and for a second the hedge was a door. On the other side, a narrow rib of a path scored into dirt by tires and feet, a fence like mine but older, and a strip of yard with a porch at the end where a light burned in a colour bulbs used to have. A boy stood at the edge of the light with the inhaler in his hand, like a prop he was afraid to misplace. The bell on the bike was brand new in that moment, shiny in the way objects are when time first sees them. He looked at me. He mouthed a word I couldn't hear. I think it was Dad. It could have been Jack. It could have been anything. He took one breath like drawing a rope hand over hand, and then another like the knot had slid. Behind the boy, a man's shadow moved at the top of the porch steps. My father's shape is a geometry I know without knowing. He came forward and set a hand on the boy's head, and the boy flinched because kids do, and then eased because men like him are careful first where it counts. I couldn't move. If I'd gone forward, I don't know what I would have put my foot on. If I'd called out, I don't know which names I'd have used. The hedge did what hedges do. It decided to be itself again. The door was leaves. The path was my mulch. The air was just air with a strong opinion. I stood with my hand on the cap like a person who thinks the charge will jump if he keeps contact. I don't know how long I stayed there, long enough for the cap to lose its circle, long enough for the bell to look like a bell again and not an idea. Long enough for the birds to start the first shift. I slept on the couch because something in me had been left standing at a fence that wasn't to mine. I dreamed of blue shirts and the cheap smell of drier sheets that pretend to be mountains. I dreamed of my father's boots without his feet in them. The next day I went to work because that's just the way you decide you still have a life. I wrote on the whiteboard, line 5, thermostat jumped. Check, board. Harlan drew a little cartoon of a bell by my note and didn't explain himself. At lunch, I sat in my truck and held my sandwich and didn't eat it and let the radio talk to itself about weather. On the way home, I stopped by my mother's again, even though no one asked me to. She was watering the tomato plants that pretend they forgive you for forgetting them. I asked her if she still had the bell we used on the porch when we thought it would make dinner time sound like a plan. She said it was in a box somewhere. That was my mother's, she said, and in her eyes I saw the picture of a woman I barely remember ringing a small sound to convince the world to change direction. It might be in the garage, she said, and we stood there and looked at the garage like it was an ocean. After supper, she said, and made supper like casseroles or spells, and after we looked in the garage and did not find the bell, and found old vacation maps, and a cooler that leaks, and a jar of screws no one has made in 30 years. You can take that, she said of the jar. I have no need of old screws. I took the screws. They looked at home in my hand in a way that made me sadder than was reasonable. I drove back through a heat that had learned to be tired. In front of my house, a boy pedaled slow on a bike with plastic fenders painted to look like chrome. He had the look of a child trying to be incidental in front of a house he wants to study. He rang his bell once, polite as a door knock, and then rolled on when I pulled to the curb. Because that is how we behave when we love rules and secrets. The coin on the cap was back to its modest size, a weather of its own. I sat on the step and held the jar of screws. I poured some into my palm. They made that dry rattle sound that is age. There were a few with slots, not Phillips, from when people thought lining up with one groove was better. I don't know why I knew it mattered, but it did. I slept through until just before dawn, the hour when night sets its face like it is offended by how short it is. I woke to the bicycle bell, ping, not at the hedge, at the porch. I rose slow because fast would have broken something. The inhaler sat on the step with its sticker half peeled. Beside it, the handbell. The bell had a thumbprint on it in water, a small oval within the grown one, and for a second I thought of how people show you pews with old dents where hands have sat and prayed. I picked up the bell, and it was colder than it ought to be. I thought, it's metal, it will do that. I lifted it chest high and gave it the smallest movement. It did not ring in the pretty way. It gave a single dull note like a coin tapped with a key, and I felt it in my sternum more than through my ears. The hedge breathed in, the hedge breathed out. The boy on the other side of time or plant life or bad water took a breath with it. Or I imagined he did, and the imagining turned into a memory. You get to the place with something where there isn't a next step that is healthy or normal. You either turn away and make dinner and learn to live with a spot of cold, like a bruise you keep forgetting, or you break the panel, you cut the hedge, you go in. I went to the shed and got the loppers because there is a category of man who does not like being given only two choices. I stood at the hedge and put the blades around a branch and stopped. The hedge has been here long enough to have opinions. It keeps the drainage swale from reading us all our sins. It keeps my neighbor from watching me burn hot dogs. It keeps the boy somewhere a breath can be taken. Cutting felt like laying a hand on a forehead you didn't ask permission to touch. I hung the loppers back on their nail and sat on the bottom rail and put my face in the leaves and said, okay. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like compliance, the way a building signs your paper, and you can go home knowing you did it right, even if right is a loop. I went inside and made eggs. I washed the plate. I wrote on my list, fix, fan, chain. I wrote, buy water filter. I wrote, call mom about screws. The pencil made its dry little song. I stood at the sink and looked at the square of yard and thought how small spaces hold more than fields if you let them. At 10, the HOA helper came and taped a notice to my door that said compliant and had a box checked next to fencing. She also checked exterior paint in harmony and landscaping maintenance. The tape made a soft sound against the wood. I left it there. It made the house look approved, like a project at work when the manager signs off. In the afternoon, I went to the feed store to buy dog bones for a dog. I don't have to give to my neighbor who does, because she watches my house when I'm not brave enough to. Travis was at the rental counter, rubbing a rag over a pressure washer that looked like it had just come through something. How's the auger? He said. I returned it, I said. Right, he said. Must be the other guy. You two look enough alike I get the papers mixed. Heat does that. Heat does everything, I said. At home the bell was gone, and in its place on the cap sat the pocket knife with E scratched into it, blade broken clean. There was a small, wet oval next to it like somebody had put their chin there to think. The hedge was very green and very still in the way things are when the air is tired of moving. That night, the neighbor's dog barked not at anything I could see, but in that uninterested way that says there is a thing that needs to be announced, and that is the end of the dog's concern. I lay awake and listened to what the night had to say about my fence. It said nothing. It said fence sounds like a word for decision. It said decision sounds like a word for weather. I got up and walked to the hedge and put my face in and parted leaves and did not pull. The handle found my hand anyway in the dark, and I let it sit there. Morning came with a thin cloud that made the sun look like a coin pressed under paper. I took the picture from the dirt and the picture from my mother S and the bell and the knife and put them in a shoebox because you cannot leave your icons scattered. I set the box on the shelf above the washer, the shelf where things that matter but not yet live. I wrote on the lid with a Sharpie hedge. It looked like a joke. It looked like labeling a drawer full of knives. On Sunday afternoon, I took Milo back to his mother Isis, and he told me in the car, looking out the window with the careful casual of a person who learned about overheard, "Mum says your house is haunted." "Does she?" I said. "She says you got sad, and now your sadness is making circles," he said like he was reciting an experiment. "What do you think?" I said. "I think the hedge is cold," he said, "and the cap is like magic." "Science," I said, and he rolled his eyes with affection. That night I did what I had been doing. I sat. I listened. The bell pinged once from somewhere that made all the rooms in my chest open at the same time. I put my palm on the cap, and it was cold. I leaned into the hedge and found the handle and merely held it, neither asking nor giving. The air on the other side cleared its throat like a child before he is about to read aloud. The fence stands straight. The HOA is satisfied. The water runs clear. The air has learned a new number and says it with pride. The hedge is green. The corner cap is a small weather of its own. Sometimes in the evening I stand in the yard and feel the cool, not as temperature but as attention. Sometimes I lay my hand on that oval, and another hand the size of mine now presses back. And sometimes the hand is smaller, and sometimes rarely. I think I feel the dry, clean weight of my father's palm, that good, honest pressure saying, "Easy, easy, breathe." Like all breathing is a thing inherited and on loan. When the bell rings, and it does, not every night, not never, it is one note, simple, like a drawer closing. I do not cut the hedge. I do not try to cross. I stop where the leaves begin. I do my small work, my maintenance, my lists. I keep the shoebox on the shelf above the washer, and when the house gets loud with its normal noises and the day goes on as days do, I know where the lid is and I know what the word says, and I know that on the other side of ordinary panels and patient green there is a boy who is me, a knot and a man's shadow, that is my father's, and a little strip of path that might be the past or the way back, or a seam bent into this lot by someone drawing straight lines on a map while the ground made other plans. I replace the fan chain and the unit hum evens out, and the fridge keeps its held note. In the morning, the dew on the cap prints the size of a child's hand, and sometimes in the midday heat it stays longer than it should, and sometimes it dries to nothing like the day forgot it had duties. And I go to work. And on the dock, the forklifts beep and the scanners chirp and the compressors tick like they are making a rhythm no one hears until it stops. And when it stops, Harlan and I look at each other, and we go to the panel, and we tighten a neutral, and the tone smooths out, and we both listen for the sound underneath everything. The one that is either a little bell, or just the part of you that keeps choosing to take in breath and let it go again, in compliance, in harmony, in maintenance. The fence will take paint someday, when grey suits it better. The hedge will need trimming. The HOA will send letters signed with loops. The water will do what pipes tell it until it decides not to. My son will grow into his knees and leave fewer small ovals on glass. The shoebox will gather dust like anything else. And the corner cap will keep its weather. And if you put your hand there and wait, if you stand still long enough that the house learns the shape you make. Sometimes another hand will meet yours where wood goes cold, and whoever it is will hold on just long enough to tell you the only thing left to say between the living and those who stand on the far side of the hedge. Easy, easy, breathe. If this story lands with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys quiet, literary horror. Comments are open. Tell me your favorite image or line.